All right, everyone. So welcome to our November ML plus X forum. It's great to see some familiar faces back here. Today, we're combining my two favorite topics, AI and music. And we're really excited to shed some light on ways that we can apply AI and ML beyond just, the hard sciences of chemistry and math and all those fun topics. All right, so without further ado, I want to introduce our first presenter. So Alan, do you mind coming up here? So Alan Eng is the Director of Information Technology in the Division of Continuing Studies, although today he's here as an amateur musicologist and community scientist. His musicology work supports the health of the Irish traditional music community by building digital tools that are of day-to-day practical value to musicians at all levels. So let's all give Alan a warm welcome.
All right, so thanks for having the Humanities. Also, thanks to Chris for this is the first breakthrough of Humanities into the Data Science Hub. I've been watching on Zoom including a few for past year, and this is indeed the first time we've left the hard sciences, as far as I know. So the reason I'm here and the reason I took on dove into data science from having no background in it a year ago. This is my baby. I'm the author of this website, irishtune.info. And the reason I do it is because the problem is I haven't talked about this before, so talking about what I've done for 32 years in 2 minutes is the challenge here. So one place to start is that this is an oral tradition, meaning you learn it by ear and must be learned orally. However, starting back in the 1990s with the internet, it became really easy to learn it visually, reading transcriptions, because you can find transcriptions a lot easier than out of paper books, which is hard to come by, and not many that tunes were transcribed in oral traditions. I was actually partly guilty back in the 90s of making it easier, looking at technology to be able to type code at each other. And anyways, so partly a guilty conscience, but also being a practical musician, a member of the community myself, I saw the problems that faced real world musicians, and how do you go about learning orally when you're not living in Ireland, or even if you're in modern Ireland. There's it is, the world of popular music is so dominant that it's not always every family has a traditional music tradition. How do you learn it the correct way, which is in person, watching and listening to how somebody else played it? And that's that's how you maintain the tradition. That's how you get the results that sound right. Music is, after all, an art form that you hear, not that you see. Another problem in the oral tradition that prevents people from being able to find those sources is that there's no reliable identities or names. And one demonstration I thought I might do, if we have that works. Is that tab open? F11. Right? Yep. So top session tunes. The number one, if you took a couple thousand people and entered their repertoires in my website, the most popular tune is the Kesh Jig. But Kesh Jig is also known as a bunch of other things. And there's a bunch of other tunes also called Kesh. They're different. And you look at the discography, there's a lot of recordings. And my work has been to identify, it doesn't matter what they called it on the recording or how it was mislabeled, which is a very common problem. This is a reliable source. It's on this track, this album, track 10, first tune, and under what name does it matter? Let's see what they probably, Kesh is a common enough there that more of the people would have called it Kesh. Anyways, that's one of the problems I had to solve. And that led to this mission statement summarizes why I do this. It's to promote the authentic, high-quality learning of the tradition. And the practical problem I have to solve with my digital tools is, in order to even do that, I have to become mercilessly and amazingly accurate at cataloging the Irish tune repertoire, because it was a problem that had not been solved before. And to some extent, I'm still the only one who have solved it, at least in such a broad, consistent way. Now, that requires a lot of painstaking work over 30 years of working through 983 albums, 67 tune books as a hobby on the side. Ate a few hours of my life. That led that is slow work, and I can't keep up with the pace at which people publish out. And people who use my website typically they brought the latest album from somebody and they want to learn the tune off of it. And they don't know what you can't trust the name they gave for it. And you wonder what the real name is or who played it better in the past. Like if you want to go back and learn traditional source code. So I needed to accelerate my work. And so I had to dream for 10 years, or probably more than that, I knew it was potentially possible given the database I had built of those audio samples of all the metadata in my database, that there's data science people, which is not me, could do something with that and solve this problem. And then ChatGPT came along and I asked it, now that ChatGPT is there, like, how would you go about doing that? And it had like a doable answer. That's abstract, as the Irish should say. So off I went on a now almost 18-month journey, lots of twists and turns. And the number one goal I had to do in order to accelerate my work is to take a new audio, like a new album I buy, give it just an audio sample, I cut each track into two, give it to the model and tell me what the closest nearest neighbors are in the universe of tunes that I've trained it on. There's other possible ideas you can do that because the result of the output of a model is to cluster your data. And I could now test all my 30,000 samples of identifications and like, do they really cluster the way they say they are? Or are there things that are clustering that I didn't know about? There's all sorts of practical uses I could do to improve the quality of my work. And then therefore, again, benefit the community and sort of with an agenda of truth. So there's so much, part of the fun of folk music is that there isn't a truth. But people, because the sport of arguing about tunes is a very ancient sport. I don't want to spoil that fun, but it is, at least it's a reference tool that I have as a scholar to provide some measure of like reliability. And then what I would like to be able to do, and that's one of the calls for help I have from this community, of how I take my work and build an app that the public can use, not just me. And if we have the time today, we can talk about the ideas you may have to do with this. So the breakthrough was I put out a call in my community, the Irish traditional music community who used my website, and a data science student in New York discovered this paper. Coincidentally, it was a Chinese named student in New York who discovered this Chinese paper with similar names, but no relation. And the data science student in New York, tried to use this open source repository called Cover Hunter that came out last summer from this industry-funded Chinese team. And he tried to use it to identify Irish tunes and discover it. Well, it did a terrible job. And so he agreed, he contacted me and said, yeah, you're probably on the right track. You need to use your data to train the model. This publicly trained, this pre-trained model that the Chinese team published is not useful for this problem. Chris suggested I talk a little bit about the technology in it. I'm not a data scientist. I treat this as a black box, and I now know enough to like what these generally are, but I'm not even going to attempt to explain to you how exactly Conformer works. I did get Claude to explain it for us I use Claude Pro's projects tool to give it the entire source code and the entire project. And this does a great job of understanding the entire project. So this is its description of what the conformer does in this particular repository. It matches my experimental results with it is what the convolution does. I do understand the convolutional neural network, but not so much the transformer. And the convolution part of the conformer extracts these local patterns and the time dimension. So it's just essentially looking for, it's encoding the rhythmic patterns in each frequency band. And then the transformer pays attention to those encodings and looks for, and this is much more flexible in a convolutional network over the time dimension, as well as the frequency dimension, to recognize patterns that are, like human musicians, flexibly arranged. And that's why it works so much better than previous research in the field of cover song identification, which mainly used convolutional neural networks, which assume there's a large scale fixed structure. That's the technology part. Go ahead.
Just a quick clarification. So is the idea that you extract the visual patterns from the spectrograms that represent songs,
Yeah,
and then you're trying to look at how those patterns vary over time.
right. So
Transformer kind of captures that pattern.
this is what a spectrogram looks like. This is, I use a CQT method. It's a well-established cover hunters. Cover hunter chose CQT as one of many possible ways to encode audio in a spectrogram. So this is the time dimension, and this is the frequency bins from I've had to configure from 170 hertz up to, I actually don't remember what top frequency is, beyond what's relevant for Irish music. That was just a quick explanation of the spectrogram, right? So it worked. I forked Cover Hunter, had to learn a lot of Python. Got a lot of help from ChatGPT and Claude in writing the Python and fixing it, debugging the repository they put out was fairly broken for various reasons. And definitely there's some cultural assumptions baked into it. Let me skip that slide. That I had to think. The result was this metric called mean average precision, 94. Essentially, I explained it in plain English terms is it's 94% accurate on a test set that I built. And 50 reals, can it cluster 50 reals that I consider probably easier for machine learning solutions, still hard for a human because there's 10,000 tunes out there. There's no human that can listen to a tune and instantly say which of the 10,000 tunes it is. But the AI's got 94% accuracy on that. Definitely just using it this summer. It's used it for a few months. And yes, I can now work through an album a lot faster. Of course, I don't trust it. I get the numbers out. This is what the output looks like. What you're seeing here is a description of a particular recording. This is tune ID 477. You can see it did cluster a bunch of 477s at the top, so it recognized that tune is the mystery audio that I gave it was in fact 477. Yes.
I'm sorry. Could you explain the spectrogram a little more? I'm not familiar with those.
Yeah.
What's on the horizontal axis? What's on the vertical axis?
So this is the time dimension. This is frequency. So you're seeing a melody. So the bright outline, it's a little fine grained for us as humans to see, but it's a neural network just needs to have numerical differences. That's all it needs. So you can see since the Irish music is a monophonic music with one voice, what matters is finding the dominant, loudest lines, and the shape. The shape of these zigzags essentially is going to identify the tune.
Also, it kind of goes like
up and higher pitch, lower pitch, earlier, later. And at the large scale structures I'm talking about, you might have some musicians always play this part the same, but this part might be a little different by everybody plays it a little differently, or they might move this part up an octave, or they might swap the order. It's all sorts of things that humans do in real life music that convolutional neural networks were not able to recognize. But this transformer breakthrough does an amazing job seeing through all that, linking them. So I was gonna say, this is I just tried this last night. I haven't done it before. This is after I had trained the model on this particular album, Tony McMahon's 4th album. And I gave it this first tune, track 13, and I got this several orders of magnitude smaller distance from, so in other words, the model found that there was the mystery audio I gave it was this close to this particular recording. That was actually the same recording. I tried that before. And these are the same musician playing the same tune, but different performances. Slightly, just human variation recorded. This is the 2nd album some years before, his 1st album decades before. And his 3rd album, he clearly likes his tune. This is a slow air. But they're all clustered together. And there's other musicians, Haley Richardson, Martin Hayes, played the same air, and the model was able to see they're all close. The other interesting musical thing that you see here is there's another completely different tune, 41 and 1086, that are apparently musically similar. I hadn't even discovered that in my notes. I usually mark and describe on my website when there's musically similar tunes. So I might look into whether I need to add a note that don't be confused by the similarity between 477 and 41. It's a possible discovery. Yes.
I'm sorry, it's the distance to what? Is it like a reference tune or something?
Yeah, so I give it an unknown audio sample. So I type in one line on my terminal on my Mac home and point it at as the input is the mystery audio. It encodes that, runs it through the network, and gives me the distance. It compares it to a bunch of reference embeddings I had stored previously for each of these samples. And it says, of the 30,000 recordings I had taught it, this is the mystery audio is this far. So, and it's 128 dimensional space. So imagine a galaxy in 128 dimensions, and it has located all of these 30,000 in this universe. And it's telling me this star you've located, if you're an astronomer, is pretty close to this galaxy, very far from that galaxy, etc. Each galaxy is one too.
I see.
So some interesting assumptions that had to find solutions around were, how am I doing on time?
Go till 12:30, so like 6 minutes.
6 minutes, okay. I mentioned AI chat assistants, I'll go skip over that. The infrastructure one is less interesting. Maybe the more interesting for this, if we have humanities, some people in the room, but this cultural assumption, it turned out to be true when I trained it on Irish music. The authors of the cover hunter people didn't seem to occur to them that this might not be a universal model. I got much better results when I trained on Irish music. The other problem was they assume music is full spectrum polyphony. So they would go from 32 hertz to the top. And so what I was finding that I was getting terrible results because in Irish music, accompaniment doesn't matter. You could sit down and some random guitarist would play in fact, what would happen in the 1920s is Irish musicians would come over, get recorded in New York studios. And the New York studios, they would do Yiddish music 1 hour and the Irish music and then Italian music, and they would have the same pianist play for everybody. They didn't know anything about Irish. So there's this long history of the compass. They would play whatever they want. It's totally irrelevant. So it was completely confusing until I cut off the bottom frequencies below 170 hertz. I got much better results. But first, that was because it was so baked in, I didn't even know how to do that in the model. I had to end up writing discovering by trial and error and writing the documentation for this project. So what do you change? What are the parameters you have to change in the project? It turned out to, in hindsight, to not be that hard to do. So I think if other people want to bring other kind of music in, it's documentation written is there now. So it's not that hard to adapt this model to your culture. This is a problem that hasn't shown up yet. So it might be an interesting, I haven't tested to see if there's recordings that are failing to be recognized because they're not tuned at 440, which is a common behavior in the folk musicians. It doesn't matter what you tune to. There's no, especially it's a solo art, just tune your music to whatever sounds good. So the current challenge I'm working on is improving how well it handles transpositions. What you're seeing here is the result of my latest from last night's version of this shift melody load method I wrote because the cover hunter authors had built a model to try and handle transposed pop music. By just copy pasting, they would shift the whole thing up. It was mathematically computationally much more efficient. Copy pasted the top of the spectrum to the bottom, which as a musician doesn't make any sense at all. You've got completely irrelevant behavior going on. And then plus, mathematically, it didn't make sense because you had a very obvious edge of irrelevant content being very different from the top. So the model would just learn, okay, so this tune is always this tune, but it's always this far from the edge. So the problem I'm trying to solve is how do I fill this? So this is what you're seeing here is my latest version of how do I simulate realistic noise so that the model can't tell that's an edge. So that a real musician does a transposition, there would be normal levels of noise below instead of just a hard edge. And that next image shows you the problem is like I have this one algorithm would generate that for this spectrogram, but then this spectrogram, I'm still getting a visible edge. And my hypothesis is that the neural network will still learn, oh, this tune is always this far from the bottom, which is not learning transposition. The data, I did do a full training with the earlier version of this, and it does much better at learning transpositions now, but it's harmed the overall learning on my other metrics. I'm working on how do I have my cake and eat it too. So my last slide is just to remind the side interested in help from people on how do I create a public-facing free app from this model of a Python project that runs in Porch. And assume you have a big process or a lot of memory. And invitation to apply this to other musical cultures. There's nothing I've done in my project that's in the public open source repo that's specific to Irish. I've tried to write the documentation so that somebody from, say, old time music, here Peter Gorman's interested in old time music, could come in and know what to do. And an encouragement, this being the first humanities presentation, that you can break into this field too if you just have a question, some relevant data, comfort with handling code, and join this community. Any questions or comments, ideas?
No. Did you ever try just a standard convolutional neural network?
Yeah, that's the first thing I did previously. That's why I have a better understanding. I tried to, following before Cover Hunter came out, the paper came out, all the previous research had been CNNs. So I tried to write one from scratch using ChatGPT assistance and TensorFlow. And I wonder if I went back now, knowing what I know now, I could do a better job. But I think the transformer just clearly is going to blow it. It's just based on the researchers' output. Their metrics of solving it for pop music was so much better than anybody else using CNN who are relying on the CNN. I thought I could use a CNN to solve a simpler classification problem, just detecting a rhythm, whether it's a real or jig or hornpipe. Right? It was a little signs of learning things on that, but I probably didn't understand enough about all the possible parameters to play with. Maybe I could now. Yes.
Do you think the transformer-based architecture might work better because it's kind of designed for sequential data and music is sequential and not just
Yes, particularly because there's flexibility in the sequence. If it was a fixed sequence, then this large CNN should be able to figure it out, although it'd be computationally less efficient.
I was kind of curious, like, what was the performance difference? Because although I would expect the CNN to do worse, it's also usually a smaller model, so it can be useful in some cases. And yeah, in that case, you'd be just looking at the visual features of the spectrograph, irrespective of where they occurred across time.
Yeah, it's pretty mind blowing. It works.
And you're able to run this on like Google Colab.
I started the Google Colab just to figure out to fix the basic problems without wondering whether it's me and my computer. And then I bought a Mac M2 with an M2 Max chip on it, which lets me get a lot faster than Google Colab with its NVIDIA VT100 or whatever it was GPU. Probably because it has 64 gigabytes of shared memory that the GPU can get access. So that's difficult to find a GPU that has 64 gigabytes of memory that doesn't have to move back and forth between CPU and GPU. So it's been, it's just the full model of with 120,000 samples post augmentation, 19 hours. It's a five-fold
Cross validation.
Five-fold cross validation.
How did you collect the 30,000 tunes? How much disk space do they use?
Only a few hundred gigabytes. That's the 30 years of work I put in starting in 1992 of building my CD collection, and started as a spreadsheet, and then it became a database. Now it's a database feeding a website. So that was one at a time manual expert work. In other words, you have to be a musician in the position to even know what to do with the recording. And a musician who has some, academic training to be rigorously consistent. Because there are like Wikipedia style websites out there for Irish music that everybody's kind of got their own idea, and it's kind of a big mess. You couldn't really do a reliable project like that with that community source data.
Is it difficult to distinguish Irish from Scottish or?
Not for an expert, to me, it's immediately obvious within two notes. Whether it's Scottish or Irish, just from how they handle, say, the fiddle bow, it's completely different.
Do you think a model like this would identify symphony music that's based on folk tunes?
Yeah, well, you could. It's the same with the pre-trained model with the cover headers. You could use their model to take an Irish tune and so what is the closest nearest neighbor in pop music to this tune? You get a number. That is I was just talking to Peter. There's cross-genre studies you could do to do like musical genealogy to discover similarities. Whether it's I was skeptical about deriving historical inferences from that, but you can, like what I do is I don't infer any kind of historical shared origins just because there's similarity. There's so many possible, just like in biology, probably. There's many different explanations for why two organisms might have evolved to be similar. They may have a shared ancestry or they may have a shared environment. It's the same in music. You can't necessarily tell what was an influence on something else. You need other factors like the human history of who knew who was in the same place at the same time to prove or disprove that there was a shared history. But in a pure and formal musical sense, that's the problem I'm solving. You could say absolutely. This is like as a practical musician, the test is, can I sit down with my other fellow community members and play the tune together? If we are looking at each other like you're playing a different tune, that's how the community, just like in linguistics, defines it's not intelligible with each other. So therefore, it's a different tune. In practice, it's a different tune. Whereas if we can play it together, oh, you just got some nice variations, but it's the same tune. So I need to hand it off to Jeremy.
Yeah, I have more questions. We should probably transition.
If somebody wants, yeah, thanks.
Tomorrow's coffee event in case anyone has a follow-up question.
I will if somebody wants to chat there. Otherwise,
good.
I probably should get back to my day job.
While I transition us, I have one last question for Alan. Is timbre represented in spectrograms very well, or is that sort of lost?
It is in terms of their like the higher the frequency distribution would show up at you would say play one note and would show up at this frequency and an octave above, and if it's above that, above that.
Gotcha.
And the distribution of weights on those harmonics represents timbre.
And noise that here purposes.
Not necessarily. I'm not sure. Like, you don't necessarily have to explain it. You know that with
I would think timbre is generally hard to decode from the spectrogram. It's just less salient than the other features. So I don't know if it would be helpful, but you could potentially include which instruments are playing as features.
right, and that's maybe data I have. So I've trained it to be timbre agnostic.
I see. Gotcha. All right. So to start our second presentation for November's forum, I want to hand things off to Jeremy Morris, who is a professor of media and cultural studies in the Department of Communication Arts. So Jeremy studies the impact of new technologies on the cultural industries, in particular music and podcasting. So let's all welcome Jeremy.
Thanks. Yeah. And thanks for having me. Yeah, this is going to be a very different kind of talk. I come from a very different background than that. But yeah, being from media studies, really interested in the impact of media on consumers and how users use it, but also interested in the media industries and how they make it. So this is the start of a project of me like trying to think about the ways in which the music industry and the podcasting industry are using AI in their either production or in things like that. So it's mostly going to be some examples of some recent cases that have kind of caused a stir and get us to think about what's going on in some of these instances. So yeah, it's called
fake artists, fake listeners, and I'll say fake is kind of in quotation marks there, just because that's sort of what we're here thinking about. So about a year ago, a singer-songwriter by the name of Anna Indiana had a song called "Betrayed by This Town" that went viral. Did anybody hear it? Anybody know this example? Well, we should get it out here so we can listen to that.
Sitting at my favorite cafe, sipping my tea It's Saturday, thinking about all he's done to everyone.
What do you think? Going to be the next hit? Yeah. Yeah. I probably don't need to tell you that the singer-songwriter is actually AI generated. The internet was kind of quick to proclaim that it was the end of creativity as we know it. Social media was all over it. In fairness, a lot of people saw it not how you just heard it, but actually saw it along with an accompanying video. So I'm going to just play that for you as well.
Trade by this town, let's tear it all down. We're all just destined to fall. We've lost it all. Alone in the streets, alone in my thoughts.
And like it's a little out of sync there, but when you're actually watching it, it is in sync, but it obviously still very much looks like this. But you know, the visuals, lyrics, and more were all built with a variety of generative AI tools. Even Anna Indiana's, even Anna Indiana's. How many times do we need to hear that track? Even the social media profile is sort of generated by AI. Here you see a post where she's asking, or the AI is asking for fans to get behind her, and then you see the creator sort of showing how it's drafting another social media post. Not entirely sure why the singer-songwriter suddenly turns into like a fitness coffee influencer in this one, right? But we can talk about who's coding these things and what imaginations they might have of a singer-songwriter. So the angry reactions from much of the public might be from fears that we're maybe moving closer to a world where all music is served to us like this, or maybe it's frustration with the technology having not come far enough. But reactions to the song sort of sum up this fear around the use of artificially intelligent tools in the music industry. With new technology, when new technologies like these surface, the press sort of worries about, you know, is this the end of everything? Is this machines replacing human? But I think the far more interesting question is like, how are workers actually using this and making sense of these tools in these spaces? As one of the articles that I draw on here, right? It's like, for me, it's more important to think about, and if we want to intervene in the cultural politics of AI, right? How do we consider the work processes that are operating here and the meaning of this work for people who are using it, right? And also what's at work in the kind of interfaces that people are using for these. After all, music and AI is not new. There's a whole kind of long history of the ways in which computers and AI have been used in music production, from RCA's kind of music composing machine into the 50s to David Bowie using sort of generative technology to help him with lyrics as well. So what I'm interested in is not necessarily because like AI is this new shiny thing, but how it fits into this longer discourse of technology that I've been tracking for a long time in the music industries. So today's agenda for me is mostly just thinking about and like hopefully hearing from you in terms of your experiences with some of the like more technical side of the details than I definitely know. Is just trying to think about some cases that have come up and how they maybe make us rethink what an artist is or what a musician is and what they're doing in as they're sort of experimenting with these technologies or using them. Also the industrial issues that it raises. All right, so I guess I just have this up here because kind of AI is everywhere in the music industry. There's a lot of industrial excitement around it. There's a lot of hype around it. And lots of these technologies kind of blur the line between algorithms that have, you know, set inputs and set outputs and what we might actually consider generative AI. I can imagine for folks who deal with a lot more precise vocabulary, it's frustrating for you to see how much AI is just like lumped onto everything. But actually for me as a media studies scholar, that's where some of the interest is, right? Like, what do people think is AI? What do people call AI? And how do they associate it with what the technology is doing? So Anna Indiana, I think, is a kind of extreme example that showcases the idea of the artist as a programmer right here. So Anna Indiana obviously is not the artist here, but the designer who's doing the work behind this is sort of experimenting with a new form of music making. And you can see here, you know, in all their videos, they list the tools that they use for it, you know, these generative technologies like ChatGPT, but also some coding work to get the melody and all of that. All the visuals are sort of done through Photoshop and DALL-E, right? So again, this is not obviously an AI production. This is very much a human curated thing that is working with these tools. So when the music industry is like, AI is kind of the end of everything, they're sometimes missing the point of how much human involvement is taking place here. And yeah, you know, a lot of these sort of artists are kind of putting their process on display in terms of how they've created this. And although the instrumentals and melodies seem to be made with kind of custom programming language there, we're now seeing the generation of a bunch of tools. Anybody use these tools, by the way, like Stable Audio or Suno? No? Yeah.
Suno.
Tried Suno. How was it?
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. It's just sort of like text to music generators, right? Where you kind of type in the kind of sound that you want to hear, and then it'll spit out a 30-second file that you can play with. How well it recreates what you've actually typed is sort of dependent, and you kind of have to play with it for a bit. But these are now, you know, quite available, quite accessible for anyone who doesn't necessarily have kind of coding skills, right? We're sort of simplifying the music making process to this. A lot of this stuff, though, relies on data sets that we don't know about. Like, these companies are very proprietary in terms of where they've used this, whether they're copywriting or whether they're using this from previously copyrighted materials or from other databases that have particular biases. So you mentioned the cultural bias in yours, right? We don't necessarily know who's been creating all these pieces, and then what of those are kind of built into these systems. So certainly for somebody who doesn't necessarily know a lot of the tech side of things, one thing I would love is, you know, like partnering with folks to kind of help walk through, because I think there's just so much fascinating stuff that's being built into these systems here that we just don't know about. This is just another one, right, where we're able to kind of type in a song, thing like this, right? If I was going to do this for today, maybe that would create a song. And it created a really shitty song, by the way. So I didn't end up playing it for you. But yeah, we need to do a lot more work into the databases that go into this and the training sets that are being used, especially given high-profile cases where the AI generates some problematic material. So this was another kind of like Anna Indiana thing, except a hip-hop version of it. So somebody had generated an avatar, and there was a musician behind this, but they were sort of like generating music through AI and generating all the publicity through it. But it actually had a record deal with Capitol Records. And then because of sort of some kind of like racist imagery that was coming out in some of the lyrics, racist tropes, and some insensitivity just to Black musicians who were making hip hop, right? The Capitol Records decided to drop this avatar because it was problematic enough, right? So again, like the possibility of us being able to create these virtual musicians is there. Thinking through the sort of cultural implications of doing so has not yet caught up with it. I think we're a long way, obviously, from listening to like entirely avatar-based musicians, but I think that's kind of a distraction, right? I think a lot of those tools that I just showed you are being used by everyday musicians all the time now to create drafts of work, to create demos, things like that. And we're starting to see the impact already in some places where artists are working and making a living. And so I don't know if any of you know of these like sound libraries, right? Where people kind of craft music that you can use in, you know, TV productions or things like that. It's usually called functional music or production tunes. But you know, these are sort of real artists who create this kind of music for a living. What happens in a world where the AI kind of text to music starts to be almost possibly a replacement for some of that, right? So rather than thinking of AI as replacing kind of all the celebrities in the music industry at the moment, it's about thinking through some of the specific parts of the industry that I think are going to be heavily impacted. Okay, I'm going to move a little bit from artist as programmer to the artist as emulator. So this is thinking about artist as kind of copying others, and this is a maybe a more well-known example, and definitely a more industrially controversial one. Has anybody heard of this song called "Heart on My Sleeve" by Drake? Or actually not by Drake, but by a ghostwriter who used a clone of Drake's voice to make the song. So I'll play that song for you here. This was about a year and a half ago.
I came middle with my ex, like Celine, not a flex. Hey, I've been just a
about a if I had left and she. Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't know how many people here are huge Drake fans, but it's a much more convincing sell than say the Anna Indiana example that I played for you, right? And yeah, this was like I said, a ghostwriter who regularly is in the music industry and writes tracks, song rights for people, and then sends it to them, and then they will perform it. But in this case, instead of getting the person to consent to performing it, they just used a voice clone to do that. So yeah, unlike Anna Indiana's track, you could kind of mistake it. Universal Music Group, which owns the label that Drake's on, ended up taking it down about 2 days after it was posted. Fake Drake, as the controversy was called, was written and arranged by a human, and was trying basically to call attention to the work that ghostwriters do and the talents that they have. The vocals were sung actually by the ghostwriter before they were fed into a voice emulator, and I don't know if you can hear it because it's not super loud right now, but this is what the original voice sounds like.
I came in with my ex, like Celine, or the flex, ayy. Pumping just a bit about a fever and left, ayy. She know what she need, or the need, or she blessed, ayy. Giving my best, ayy.
Okay, so we've got like voice as digital data that's broken down into these individual components, and they can be fed into kind of AI software that helps create this. And again, this is now stuff that is becoming kind of widely available. There's a site that is now called Jammable, used to be called Voicify AI, but there's a bunch of other these sites. Don't know if any of you have played with them, but you can kind of put in a voice of your own.
To feel your heart beating next to mine.
And you can turn it into voices of popular characters, in this case, Homer Simpson. To feel your heart beating next to mine. Or Drake or The Weeknd or anybody else, right? Artists who passed away can be brought back and put into conversation with new trends. So this is a Johnny Cash Barbie remix, in case you're interested.
You can brush my hair, undress me everywhere. Oh, come on, Barbie, let's go party, 'cause I'm in a Barbie world.
So, on the one hand, yeah, it's pretty good. Like some of these tools are replicating that in a way that is impressive, right? And actually it falls in line with a lot of things that musicians have been doing for a long time. They've had access to a huge range of plugins. So if you're a musician, if you put guitar, you can play an acoustic guitar into a computer and out pops an electric guitar. You can have it be cloned to sort of synthesize or simulate all kinds of different things. But Fake Drake merely recognizes that voice emulation is now sort of at the same point that guitar, violin, or drum emulators have been at for decades. Voice is now just another plugin that artists can use. But because voice is typically the thing that's most understood is connected to the person, right? This raises all these other kinds of anxieties and fears. It's linked to skill and authenticity. And this is why, if you think about technologies like auto-tune from the 2000s, right? There was a lot of consternation about that then, right? So Fake Drake has sort of raised all these issues of authorship, copyright, and deception, and, whether artists have consent or not. I don't know, maybe we can look at the legacies of sampling to try and help understand this. History of sampling is both instructive and I think insufficient. The practice of using somebody else's words or beats or rhythms, particularly early hip hop, remix and sample culture was pretty big. And it was actually seen as a kind of an experiment, a critique, a subversion of what was going on in music at the time. That was until the music industry sort of put license practices in place so they could kind of domesticate sampling. I don't know if sampling these days is considered as radical as it sort of might have been then. So what's going on now with some of these voices might be a sort of a way to kind of push the laws of the system at the moment. But they also raise a number of kind of other troubling issues. And one of those I'd just like to highlight is what you might call digital blackface. The way in which it calls forth the industry's longer appropriation of music by Black artists. And so I'll just finish this section with one last case of emulation here. And it's the one I have the biggest struggle kind of trying to figure out how to approach it. But it's a Delta blues song that was created using a tool called Suno. And a Rolling Stone journalist went in to sort of say, hey, let's try and play with this system. Let's create what we can. So they sent in some text prompts to create this Delta blues song that was supposed to be reminiscent of a sort of 1940s track. And so I'll play just a bit of that here. Maybe. Nope. Nope. Oh no. Wonder. So I can't play it. I can play it if you give me afterwards. I'll show you on my computer. But it's a very sort of like very evocative of that style of music. Sounds much like you were saying, like it's pretty good, right? Like it imitates that era. And the lyrics are about like this soul that's trapped in the circuitry. It's like this AI machine that wants to get out. It talks about the pain inside me of, you know, being in this computer. So you've got this like blues song in the style of an African-American artist, in the voice of an African-American artist or an African-American generated artist, an approximation of that. Right, it's this example of a kind of cultural fracking here. What does it mean to train AI on music made from the pain, suffering, and the kind of resistance of slavery, and then make that a part of kind of cultural material that anybody can draw on? Right? So it becomes a really complicated kind of example. Sorry, I didn't have the sound for that. Last one, I'll just say quickly, how am I doing for time? Got to get done. Is just the example of musicians who maybe tried to take a little bit of agency in this on their own hand and are licensing their voices to be, legally allowed to play these songs. So Grimes and an American artist, Holly Herndon, they sort of license their voice, and users can go and use those voice clones, create songs with them. And these artists have actually built an entire kind of royalty structure that helps get royalties to the artists as well as to the fans that are doing the remixing. And so that's just some of that. And then, the last section I have is just on listening and the way AI bots are being used to kind of help with streaming fraud. But I'll save that because I feel like I've used my time. Anyway, thanks. Sorry, I know it's a little bit different than probably where you're headed before. But
why does music matter?
Why does music matter? Yeah, well, I think it matters in our own experiences of everyday life. I think, like, if you look at the number of people who use music in everyday life and how they use it to craft their identities, how they use it to kind of understand the world around them, how they use it to communicate, to make sense of their own feelings. It's also a huge industry, so it's there are industrial, there are personal reasons that it sort of matters. I think it also matters that these things are happening in music first, because this is where people are testing some of the things that, like computer scientists are working on, and where we see a lot of the anxieties around it are in media because of how important media is to everyone.
How long has voice licensing been a thing? Like, that was my question when it came to emulation. Like, are there laws around this? Can you license your voice, or how does it work?
Yeah, so they're just getting started. Like, they have not got a kind of like clear system on how to do this. There's organizations that are now popping up that are allowing you, if you're a musician, to sort of partner with them, and they'll work out the licensing deal for you. There's the like Performers Union, SAG-AFTRA. They just like signed a license for all their performers to be able to have replicas of their voices created for video games. So there's like specific use cases scenario where it's been legalized, but not others, which is why you have like individual artists sort of playing with that.
Do you think AI can help new artists to progress in their careers?
Do I think
if AI can help new artists to progress in their careers?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the way that a lot of like technology has helped make music production more accessible, AI can do that, right? Like, I can't play drums, I can play guitar, right? But if I want to make an album that has all those things, if I've now got tools where it's possible to sort of do that, that can be helpful. I also think it can be, like I didn't talk about any of the production tools, but like AI being used to help master and mix albums, like skills that would have cost a lot if you're going to a studio, can now, in theory, be done on your computer, right? So it's possible that it makes it easier for you as somebody starting off with not a lot of money to create something that sounds a little bit more like it came from at least more money than what you have. Whether that's worth some of the trade-offs, or whether you're going to have access, right? Like right now, a lot of the AI stuff is still, it's all on the business model where like you've got to pay for tokens in order to be able to, right? So like, how accessible is it going to be in the end? I don't think we know yet. Yeah.
So instead of emulating the voice of a phenomenal musician, can I myself sing into the machine and just make it sound better, but it's still my voice instead of someone else's?
Yep. Yeah, that's a possibility. And there's ways that you can do that involve AI and ways that don't, right? Like, so you could, in theory, kind of make a clone of your voice, or you can use a technology like auto-tune, which is not really AI, but it's, a different kind of plugin that lets you basically like pitch your voice so that you're singing in key all you want, right? So, I mean, this is a widely used technology in the industry now that almost every artist probably is recording with it. But again, it was one of those technologies that like we hated and thought was the end of the world in 2003, but it's now, T-Pain, it's now in every song that is at the top of the charts. I'm being a little facetious there, but it's like there were a lot of worries about
I can't picture T-Pain's voice without it.
Yeah.
Overly out.
Right. And he's a great musician. Like there's actually, it's funny that he's associated with that and only that because he's got some really interesting, anyway. But yeah.
I guess it's less of a question, more of just a point for discussion. But I just want to mention, like all of these AI algorithms, what they're really good at is regurgitating the data that they've been trained on. They're not good at coming up with novel things outside of their training data. So I think these kinds of tools are great for like mass producing music, but I don't think they could come up with like the next like original artists, Jimi Hendrix type of person.
Yeah, I mean, I it's hard to know. I would agree with you. They're obviously conservative in the sense that they're drawing on what's been done. But I think that's where like, if we're seeing these less as like it's AI or it's humans, and instead it's like this, right? People will mess with them. Yeah,
That's general.
Yeah.
Partly because of my training in German literary history, particularly some German philosophers, authors like many other cultures, articulated very clearly and well how much genius and creativity in any art form depends on this long history of centuries of knowing what's being for you, and it's always incremental progress, kind of combine what's trained for you. So my hypothesis is if you train the AI on enough data, it will be equally creative.
Yeah, or another way to look at that is if you learn patterns in like separate genres really well, but then you combine them, which the AI could potentially be combined.
Right.
Get genre mixing. So good point. Yeah. I guess it can create novelties too. Yeah. First case you have the 10. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think one question. Like, technically, can you distinguish for audio that is seen by a really human being or from agent?
That's a good question, and I don't know if I've like fed it into software that would analyze. Like I don't know if you could put it in Adobe Audition and see whether or not there's some characteristics of it that would indicate that it comes from that. I don't think so. Like I imagine that it comes out as voice and audio, and I don't think it would distinguish. But
What was the question?
can you distinguish AI voice from like? I mean, I guess with like ChatGPT, they run like samples of whether or not it's most likely to have come from that. But I don't know if you can do that with the audio in a way that somehow indicates it's more human.
Detect whether it's artificial, unless you gave it enough artificial samples to train that. But my psychic learned to respect the sensitivity of neural network. If you train it, it could certainly say that it's not the same person. that's an artificial person, but that's not the same person.
Right.
So
Yeah. So if you put Drake in and the Drake clone, you could tell they were not the same, but you might not be able to tell they were.
That's not Drake is easy. That's not Cupid.
Yeah.
That's not T-Pain.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean that's the thing though. It's like with T-Pain, right? It's like, yeah, that's always going to be is that a human? No, yeah.
I guess just maybe one last general point. I do worry about Gen AI in general, kind of just mass producing these things and diluting all the markets, not just music, but it's all over the place. Like social media, content's being generated left and right. And it feels like it's diluting humans just in general, which I don't love.
Well, the part I was going to end on is there's actually a case that just happened, like a Spotify, a guy had made, I don't know, over $10 million by just generating a bunch of fake AI songs and then using AI, like AI tools to like create a kind of botnet to listen to all those plays. So it's the biggest instance of streaming fraud that, and like the government is currently like pursuing it, but all these details are coming to light as a result. But yeah, he just had like millions of songs on the network because there's no necessarily stopping it. It looked like they were coming from different users because he had signed up through a bunch of different usernames and then had them all play in chats. So yeah, I've got like a whole other strain of my research, which is just on listeners and how like the listener is being presented in as a result of how much music is on these services.
Do you think the systems are good enough now that they could create like a Mozart symphony with different movements?
Yeah, good question. I mean, David Cope's work on like this guy who did I don't know if I can get back to it easy enough, but he's been working at it since the 80s, basically. That guy there. And that's been his work. And it actually, like, already in the 90s was playing symphonies that people didn't know were, at least the notation was scripted by a computer. So it was being played by a real symphony, but whether or not, like now, and I don't think people knew that, it was written by a computer in some of the experiments.
I do kind of the opposite thing, that the AI inception, or especially in the case with millions of generated songs in Spotify, when the models start using that as inputs or further outputs, and it's kind of the pink slime scenario.
Yeah.
Where, it's all just regurgitating itself.
Yeah, I think that's good. And it's to your point about just internet content in general, right? Like, I think as these things evolve, the like duplication of and the basing of new stuff on other material that was already sort of either poorly generated or sort of not high quality to begin with.
And it's almost impossible to detect nowadays. You can't write an algorithm that's going to detect these things.
I might suggest that the pink slime phenomenon is not unique to AI. AI in general just to be accelerating.
Yeah.
So we've already done human-generated pink slime for centuries. We can generate a whole lot more of it now with similar assistants.
Yeah, and I think that's true with a lot of these technologies that I've been talking about. Like they're not brand new. Like they're.
Oh, maybe we have to just create a quality control system made without of humans. No, you are. My older daughters just kind of have an ear for the AI generated music and the real ones. Just listen and say, no, this is totally just made up with AI. So humans can just make control team that will kind of watch for the good quality of the music and just so this is the good we can play it and this is just trash.
Sure.
It's live concerts from it.
It's hard though, because you also have humans that are like trying to make things sound more robot. Like that's an aesthetic, right? I don't know if you've ever heard of this genre, hyperpop, but it's like a thing that sounds like it was generated by computers. But like, I don't actually think a computer could have, like, it is one of those things that seems highly creative, but they're just pulling from all over the place of like what the internet sounds like. And it is, so
it's become a feedback loop. I mean, social media, especially for me, it's the amount of fake content out there. It's basically driven me off those platforms. And now, I don't know, I rely on human interactions like this community to ensure that we're all real.
Is this when I mentioned I was an avatar the whole time?
Yeah, thank you so much for shedding some light on a broader social perspective.
Yeah,